Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. Today's show is about another example of government overreach. But first, if you're loving what you're hearing on the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, go out, tell 2 friends today. Why keep all this goodness to yourself? The podcast can be heard on your favorite listening platform, whether you have an iPhone or an Android phone. We're on a total of 15 different platforms, and if you're not an avid podcast listener, you can even find us on YouTube. We are back. Today we're talking about another example of government regulation overreach. In January 2017, the Canadian federal government instituted a mortgage stress test rule. This required chartered banks to subject borrowers to a financial stress test when applying for a residential mortgage loan. The stress test was designed to protect the marketplace and the banks from the risk of rising interest rates in the future. Borrowers would need to qualify for an interest rate a full 2 percentage points higher than the actual prevailing interest rate in the market. So if interest rates were, say, at 3%, the borrower would need to qualify as if the rates were 5%. It was a measure also designed to cool off what many saw as an overheated real estate market in several of Canada's major cities, including Vancouver and Toronto. It has the advantage of making it slightly more difficult to qualify for a loan without necessarily costing the homeowner more money. In the latest twist, the Canadian federal government is now examining whether the same rules should be applied to private lenders. This information was reported by the Globe and Mail, who cited 3 sources directly familiar with the talks taking place behind closed doors. Since the rule change in 2017, fewer borrowers have qualified for bank financing. Borrowers have responded by turning to alternative lenders to complete their financings. In the wake of the rule change last year, there's been considerable growth in market share for private lenders. Private lenders have different underwriting rules than banks, and they generally charge a premium rate of interest compared with banks for an equivalent loan. So these loans are actually more expensive for borrowers, but they're a last resort for many who don't have any alternative. Today, private lenders represent about 10% of the residential mortgage market. That's a significant increase compared with only a year ago. Some banks have expressed concern that if the trend continues, private lenders could eventually represent 15% of the overall market. The banks have been quietly lobbying the federal mortgage insurer and the bank regulator over the loss of market share. So exactly what is the rationale for imposing more rules on private lenders? The regulators are concerned about the risk being transferred from banks to private lenders. So here we have a government that's created a side effect from a new rule that they didn't anticipate, and their idea of a solution is to layer another rule on top of the new rule instead of eliminating the rule that caused the problem. Wait a minute. Since when has the government been concerned about protecting accredited investors from taking financial risks? In my opinion, this has nothing to do with protecting wealthy investors. The federal government doesn't want the banks to lose market share. In fact, I would argue the banks have lobbied the government and convinced them that they should protect their market share. The argument is that banks are more responsible because they have capital buffers. Private mortgage lenders don't. Well, wait a minute. This is the silliest argument ever. The banks have to hold capital reserves because for every dollar they take in deposits, they lend out that same money 10 times. The system of fractional reserves is the proverbial house of cards. If 10% of the bank's loans went bad, their deposits would effectively be wiped out. They would have no equity left. Even if only 1% of a bank's loans go bad, they need to raise 10% more equity in capital reserves just to balance things out. If a loan goes bad with a private lender, then the private lender is out the money they put at risk. No capital reserves are required. Nothing else is affected, only that loan. There's no cascade effect. It's amazing to me that the folks making the rules don't actually understand how our financial system works. The proposed rule change is about protecting the market share of the largest financial institution through regulation to prevent private investors from growing their business. It's not adding risk to the financial system. I'm not hearing complaints from private investors that they need government to step in and help them with new rules on how they should underwrite their loans. They're not asking government to compensate them for losses that haven't even happened or that might happen at some point in the future. The private lending space is already regulated at the provincial level. The federal government is proposing to step in. No doubt the provinces will have something to say about jurisdictional overreach. If the federal government fails, they may ask the provinces to implement rules that mirror the federal rules. It's kind of like, hi, we're here from the government and we're here to help. Well, no, thank you, sir. We're just fine. Oh, no, trust me. We're here from the federal government and you need our help. As you're thinking about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow.